White gold, the British colonists called it, precious crystals that added a touch of sweetness to a rough and tumble life. As settlers moved west, they took a desire for sugar with them. But because most sugar was extracted from tropical sugar cane, it was expensive and hard to get. In the 1850s, Brigham Young, desiring to create total self-sufficiency in Deseret, promoted the making of sugar from sugar beets, a process developed in 18th century Germany. But the actual methods were not well understood, and early attempts in Utah did not result in sugar. All that changed, however, when newer methods using lime for getting beet sugar led to the establishment of the Lehigh Sugar Factory in 1891. It would kick off an industry that at its height ranked third in the state in terms of economic impact. Sugar production and its related industries became especially important in Cache Valley and had a particular impact on the town of Providence. Beets became a popular crop among Providence farmers, but even more important was the quarrying in Providence Canyon of the limestone necessary for the sugar-making process. Together, these industries account for a vital chapter in Providence history. Providence had been settled in 1859 along the banks of Spring Creek. It received its name from the LDS apostles Orson Hyde and Ezra T. Benson, who visited it shortly after settlement and thought it somewhat of a providential place. Nestled in the shadows of the mountains, christened Little Baldy, Big Baldy, Temple Baldy, and others, it grew up on the east side of the valley, populated by hard-working, hardy folks of English, Swiss, and German descent. By the early 1900s, it had a population of about 900, most engaged in dry farming, fruit growing, raising cattle, and other agricultural endeavors.
So beets become a very big item to all the farmers here in Providence. And a lot of them, all the farmers, are talking their interconnects, alders, firmans, zollingers, but any farmer had beets as a cash crop, so we had some money coming in. This was a big thing for them because they got the use of the tops to feed their cattle, and the beets they sold and made money off of it.
Growing sugar beets was not an easy job. It required back-breaking thinning in the spring, tedious weeding in the summer, and topping off the greens by hand at harvest time. Most of these tasks were done by crews of young boys and girls.
First thing, after they planted them, they had to make sure they got them planted so they wouldn't freeze. Then at the end of school, when it was out, they would hire the young people and all those that wanted to work to go in to thin the beets. The beets was planted in rows just like you do the grain. And you'd go down and making sure they was about 8 inches, 6 to 8 inches apart so you get the big beet and get some growth in it. And the short hoe was so you'd bend over and picking the doubles, what we call doubles, where there was more than one. If you was real accurate, you could chop them sometimes to where there was just one beet, but you had to just have one.
If you left two, you got in trouble. So we tried to do what was right. Our backs would really give us a fit, so we would crawl on our knees if we could. And it seemed like those rows were so long and the sun was so hot that we were okay.
The end of the school year brought with it a certain knowledge that the sugar beets had to be thinned. If there was ever anything which made a student want to stay in school, it was that certainty. Historian A.J. Simmons.
Thinning beets was a backbreaker, and anybody that did it would tell you that. If you made it to the end of the rows one time, they was a block and a half long, you just lay down and moan because your back hurt so bad. And then when you got a little better, you get back up and head down the row again. You had so many you were supposed to do each day, and you tried to meet that quota.
Went to work at 8 in the morning. We went home for lunch at noon and back in the fields until about 6 o'clock.
At least once you would be hired by them to go and hoe, and you could use a long-handled hoe for that, because the weeds and that, they was maybe close to the beets, but you would get most of them with a long-handled hoe, so you didn't have to bend over.
The beet harvest was so important that most schools let kids out for a couple of days of beet vacation in late October.
It might have been a vacation for those whose fathers didn't raise sugar beets, but for the rest of us, it was no vacation at all. A.J. Simmons.
Then when it got to the fall and the 2-week beet vacation, it wasn't a vacation for us, but and sometimes, you know, the weather was bad. You had the rain, the snow, and it was cold and not very enjoyable to be out. We did love it when we had a good fall.
When beets were harvested, they were taken to the sugar factory where they were thinly sliced and boiled down to create a sweet juice. The pulp was used for cattle feed. The juice was mixed with a milk of lime created from limestone that was slaked into a liquid solution. The mixture was then cooked into a syrup. When it reached the right consistency, the syrup was separated through flotation and filtering to remove all the lime and impurities.
And then through a Stephan's operation, that's where the lime comes in. So you'd haul the lime rock, they would put it in the lime kiln and fire it and get the nice white powdery lime, and somehow use that in the operation to float the impurities out of the sugar.
The remaining crystals were run through a process called spinners to separate the dark molasses from the pure sugar.
You'd top them off and throw the beets in a pile, and the beet tops would be in a row and the beets would be in a row. And that was a lot of work too, because you just bend over and you have to dig them out and hold them up and chop them off. Some of those beets is 8 to maybe 12 pounds of beet, and if you couldn't hold them, you'd put them over your knee and hope you didn't whack your leg, and maybe hold them up this way and chop them that way. But it was work. It was a lot of work.
At first, beets were shipped to sugar factories in Ogden and other parts of the state. But by 1900, beets were so plentiful in Cache Valley that there was a push for a local factory. The first factory, the Logan factory, opened in 1901 west of Providence in the confluence of the Blacksmith Fork and Logan Rivers. By 1910, it was processing 60,000 tons of beets a year. Over the years, 150 or so Providence residents were employed at the factory, where they were paid 15 cents an hour. At the height of sugar production, there were 4 factories in Cache Valley. In addition to the Logan factory, plants in Lewiston, Cornish, and Smithfield Amalgam joined with one in Whitney, Idaho, to form the Amalgamated Sugar Company.
And we would throw the beets up into the wagon. And usually one beet would get thrown too fast and go over to the other side, and you'd hear a loud yell because someone got hit on the head. And sometimes it started a fight, but it was soon stopped because we had to work. But, you know, sometimes you had to do a few things to have fun.
You had to have the point sharp, and so you'd sharpen it every other day or every day to make sure it's sharp. You would cut through and then hook the beets with this thing. And if sometimes when you was cutting them off the side, you might hook your knee or your lower leg and it dig in a little bit. But then, of course, the Levi's was very important. You had to have your handle so it wouldn't slip off when you're swinging and cutting the beets. And yeah, this is my knife that I kept around and still have it today of the beet harvest.
The citizens of Providence had long looked to the nearby mountains for water, timber, rock, fish, and game. Around the turn of the century, prospectors also began to look for minerals such as lead and zinc. In 1903, Elias Peter Hansen found a bed of high-grade limestone located about 6 miles up Providence Canyon, filed a claim, and contracted with the Amalgamated Sugar Company to supply lime for sugar beet processing. The rock was broken up in one-man maximum pieces, the size one man could load on a wagon, then was piled on flatbed wagons and hauled to the sugar factory west of town, where it was again broken up into usable sizes. But because this left a lot of waste at the factory, the company began to require the rock to be brought down in about 8-inch pieces, which were loaded into deep wagons which could carry about 5 tons at a time. A round trip from the quarry to the factory and back could take anywhere from 8 to 12 hours. The limestone sold for $1.35 a ton. Haulers were paid $1.15 a ton, which meant they could make about $5.75 a day, which was good money in those days. Between 1903 and 1904, some 3,000 tons of rock were hauled from the quarry.
The wagons were mostly owned by the farmers. They owned the horses. Providence just had beautiful horses. They had perch and all the big draft animals for the quarry. And they used to have their pulling contests over at the county for that reason. And the animals were just huge and just beautiful animals. They'd call 14 ton out of there. And the local people, the men that didn't have farms in the town, or didn't have full-time working on the farms, they would rent the horses from the farmers, and they normally get the horses and the wagon for $3.50 a day, and then they would go up to the quarry, and they would quite often leave at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to get up to the quarry, get their load of rock. They'd be back out by noon or around noontime, and then the horses, of course, would be turned back to farmers, and the horses would go to work for the rest of the day on the farms.
In 1922, Frank Kelly took over management of the quarry, a position he held for many years. By this time, some 70 to 80 men were employed at the quarry, and cabins were built to house about 50 workers at the site.
And then in the 30s, during the Depression years and that, we lived at the quarry. We had a camp up there. We had our cabin, which was our home that we lived in. We had 2 bunk houses, each of them holding about 12 men. And then we had the kitchen and a big dining area. And of course, below that, where the wind blew the right way, we had all the horses and the mules down there that worked in the quarry. And that was our camp that we had, and it was within walking distance of the quarry. The men would walk up to the quarry from there.
Frank's wife, Clara, brought their young family to live in a cabin there, where she also cooked for the workers.
It made Providence different than the other little towns in the valley, because the quarry was something unusual, and it was another income that all of the men had. And it started as soon as we could get the roads cleared in May, snow, and would run through the end of September, depending on the weather, of course.
Looking back, many people considered the time from the early 1920s to about 1935 the golden years of the quarry. But times were changing. The wagon haulers were growing increasingly unhappy with their wages and threatened to quit in order to force the company to raise their pay. Frank Norberg, who was then operating the quarry, called a bluff and brought in 5 red Ford trucks to replace the wagons. A 1936 Ford truck cost $200. Trucks could make the trip to the railroad in an hour and 15 minutes instead of taking all day. The sugar company also did a major overhaul of quarry equipment, upgrading the entire operation with modern equipment for handling the rock and air-operated drills for preparing holes for blasting.
So that time they put the trucks in, and they were beautiful red Ford trucks. I can still remember them. And they used to go up and pass the street out here, just one block away from where I lived. They'd go up the Dugway, and they'd make a trip about every hour and a half. We would run down on the corner of 4th South and watch them as they'd go by one, about 10, 15 minutes behind each other. And there was a guy on the truck by the name of Mert Matthews. And Mert used to wave to us. I'd see he had his smoking cigar out there, and he's just having a time. And Mert started throwing us a piece of candy. And we got so close to him that one day he said, "Would you like a ride?" And so 3 of our little boys, 10 years old, jumped in that truck. And he says, "Where are you going?" He said, "Oh, we're just out for a walk." And he says, "I'll take you halfway and let you out, and then I'll give you a ride back." That was the beginning of my experience with the quarry.
LeGrand Johnson Construction Company took over the operation of the quarry in 1945 and brought in a fleet of World War II surplus Burma trucks to haul the limestone. More efficient methods were also adopted to increase production.
Born and raised in Providence, and I lived a half a block away from the road where the quarry trucks came down out of the quarry. So as a little boy, I spent a lot of time over on the corner waving to the drivers of those great big trucks as they came down the road with lime rock on. The year I graduated from high school, I was lucky enough to get a job. Lee Jorgensen was the superintendent in the quarry, and he hired me, and I began driving what we call the old Burma specials, the old K-11 Army Surplus Internationals out of the quarry. There were usually 9 trucks hauling out of the road, on the road to the railroad cars, and 3 or 4 up in the quarry hauling from the shovel to the crushers.
I worked there during the summers, for 4 summers, 61 through 65. And I was just out of high school, was going to school, and there was a summer job. LeGrand Johnson supported a lot of students by providing summer work for them at the quarry and at other facilities that he had. Mainly I drove truck in the quarry itself from the shovel down to the crusher. And during the 4 years I was there, my dad also worked there during the summer months. And he taught me how to operate the shovel. And the last year I was there, I operated the shovel quite a bit.
In June of 1946, what has become known as the Big Blast took place. Intended to bring down rock for the entire season, it used 28 tons of dynamite, which had been shipped in 2 large freight cars. The powder was placed in various tunnels, or coyote holes, drilled by the workers, and set off on Saturday, June 29th. It brought down 125,000 tons of rock in a single blast.
The rock crews that we had would carry, and I worked for them for when I was older, and we'd carry a box of, which was a 50-pound box of dynamite in a burlap sack over our shoulder and climb up the cliffs with it. Or we could carry 3 cans of black powder, which was usually about 30 pounds to a can. They would drill a hole, and they drill down usually 20 feet for the major blast. And then when the hole was drilled, you would drop one stick of dynamite down in, light it, and that made a hole in there that you could get more in. And then and they called it springing. You'd spring the hole. Then you'd put down 2 or 3 sticks of dynamite to make a bigger hole down there. And then you'd drop in your cans of black powder, which was usually 3 or 4 cans of black powder. And that, of course, was what ignited the blast, and it could come down. And one blast would be several train carloads of rock.
Eventually, this type of blasting was considered too dangerous, and work shifted to a terrace or benching technique similar to that used in the Kennecott mine in Bingham Canyon.
It was interesting because the trucks did not have safety brakes on at that time. They did a little later. But as we'd start down, we would be in the lowest gear we had, first gear. We'd come down the area of the canyon called the steeps. And then we get down a little farther and shift up into second gear and go down and past an area called Billy's Camp. And then we can make it up into third gear as we got down to the springs. And then we come along the area and get even to fourth gear as we came across Booty's Roll-Off.
Well, Booty's Roll-Off was Booty Naylor, who rolled his wagon off the deal, and it rolled. I think he lost a couple of horses on it too, but that forevermore was Booty's Roll-Off.
And then we come to Latham Dugway, shift down again. Latham's Flat, shift up again. Tyers Dugway, shift down again. Tyers Flat, shift up again. Down across the cattle guard. The highest gear, we only had a 5-gear transmission. And when we got down to the flat on the bench, we could get as high as 4th gear. Then we'd shift down again to come down the road to 2nd West in Providence. And in those days, we drove as far north as the Providence Lane, over where the Johnson baseball diamond is now. And then we drive down the Providence Lane to the Highway 89, 91, and turn down the highway and go down to where the old sugar factory was to dump the rock into the railroad cars.
Quarrying limestone was hard, rough, dirty, and dangerous work. As one old-timer noted, "If you wanted to know whether a man has worked at the quarry, just feel his shin bones. And if they're full of nicks, you know he's spent time there."
A lot of people were hurt there. I got a foot smashed when I was in high school and ended up in the hospital for a couple of weeks. Slowed down my football career to some extent, but that's the way the quarry was. It wasn't an easy place. You're dealing with dynamite and black powder and sledgehammers and all those things. And trucks. A lot of the trucks get out of control. They're coming down with a big load. And
this one day, my brother-in-law was just here from the service. He was looking for work, and he thought maybe we could get him to drive that. And so he got on the truck and went with me, and we drove up and loaded up and was coming down the canyon, and he said, "This is a piece of cake." He said, "I think I'd like to do that." I thought I'd better show him what really happens. It happened to every truck many times. Every now and then those big trucks would jump out of gear. And I picked a spot just right where it was pretty steep, and I just kicked it out of gear. He didn't know that. That truck literally lunged about 20 feet down the road. Took me about a half mile to get under control, and we came on back down, and I pulled down where I picked him up, and he said, "Babe, I want to get out." That was the end of his trucking experience, but it was a kind of a hazardous ride. 2 or 3 of the trucks tipped over. They had brake problems. They had a lot of problems keeping them running.
Over the years, there were several serious accidents. In October 1916, a charge of dynamite knocked Jacob Cutterer off a cliff, and he died from the fall. On August 10, 1917, Philip Stricker died in the same way. Quarry workers found to their dismay that rocks sometimes had a mind of their own. On July 17, 1930, a charge of powder was set, and men and teams moved a safe distance. But for some unexplained reason, instead of blowing the ledge to the south as it was intended, it blew west, showering the entire quarry with rocks. 11-year-old Joe Naylor, who had climbed to the top of a large rock to watch the blast, fell as he tried to dodge the falling rock and died of a broken neck. William Bud Kendrick, then 23, was standing with the horses when a small rock hit him in the chest and punctured a lung. He died 3 days later.
we loved it up there. I had my brothers there. We had a lot of wild animals there. The deer used to be all around the place. We had a black bear that was up on the ridge that had cubs, and we went up and threw bread to them all the time, and we always thought that, told them they were getting manna from heaven, you know, because we didn't dare get close to them, but we threw the bread. My dad would have the people from town come up once a year, and they'd have a big party for everybody, and it was the best. It was always steak and potatoes and everything, and we'd go out and gather pine boughs to decorate the whole the hall that we had for the men. And they would come up, and of course in those days they loved to sing, and after they would eat, the men would all go outside and sing, and they had all the old songs, you know, that Swanee River and all of those that, you know, we haven't heard for a few years.
was the truck drivers that drove to the sugar factory would make their pickups. Some of them would come up to the little shack we had for a kind of a rest or a break. And we took this dead rattlesnake and put in the trail where they used to come up, jump over the conveyor belt onto this trail to make it up to this little shack. And we put this dead rattlesnake there all coiled up. And several of the truck drivers, they come up, and some of them darn near took a turn around in midair to head back down the trail.
Over time, beet production and the quarry were important to the Providence economy, not only themselves but also in supporting other industries. In the early years, several blacksmiths were kept busy repairing rock wagons.
The whole thing was a horse killer and a wagon smasher. The only ones who made any money off the quarry were the blacksmiths who fixed our wagons. Billy Checkett's, quarry worker.
Providence became known for the quality of its draft horses. Local merchants, such as the Tire Brothers, were able to support a mercantile store. And even during the Great Depression, workers were able to support their families. However, increased competition from other sugar sources and declining beet production began to take their toll. In the late 1970s, the sugar-making process had left Cache Valley and no sugar beets were grown. By 1980, there were no sugar factories left in Utah. The quarry continued in production for a few years, but increased concerns over safety, noise, and quality of the watershed in the canyon signaled a change in attitude and conditions. In 1986, work stopped and the canyon fell silent.
We were so glad to get back to school. But, you know, it was hard on your back. It was a lot of work. And my mother used to say, "Oh, I feel so sorry for you girls out there in those beets and that." But, you know, that was what we had to do.
It wasn't unusual. At about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the kids say, "Dad, it's time for a break." We get in our Jeep and we go to the quarry. We pull out the waterfall, and if you haven't been there, I'll take you. But to go out that waterfall and sit there and have root beer and roast hot dogs and just enjoy an evening together, take the .22 and let the kids shoot. Those are items the kids will remember. And I'll bet there isn't a week went by, all those summers when we were raising our family here, that we didn't go to the quarry.
For us young people, they were fun. There were 2 or 3 of them that they were open air. 2 or 3 of them had a canvas top just to shade you. And so you're out in the wide open air. You could lay the windshield down in front if you want. Most of us didn't. We wanted a little protection. But the wind would blow and dust and whatever else, but so what? We were driving a truck and getting paid for it.
Most of the men would sit and talk and sing a lot of songs, and I learned a lot of songs from them. That when I got into grade school, the teacher asked me to sing a song, and I sang a song, and it wasn't a very good song because I'd learned it from when I was up there. So I got in trouble with my parents, but I thought I didn't see anything wrong with it.
Hard work and sacrifice, determination and perseverance, a desire to make life a little sweeter, a little better for themselves and for future generations. That's the story of Limestone and sugar beets in Providence.